All right, let's go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our weekly 30-minute webinar. My name is Brian McKay, Systems Engineer here at Verify, and I'll be your host for today's session, where we will be discussing how to reconcile call count discrepancies in your CUCM reports. Here to walk us through it, we have my fellow engineer, Mike Stratton. How are you doing today, sir?
Good, Brian. How are you?
I'm pretty good. I got to tell you, man, trying to figure out why the numbers don't add up sometimes is my kryptonite. So I'm glad you're taking the wheel on this one.
That's good. You're hosting.
All right. So please note that these webinars are always recorded and posted within 24 hours, so you can review them at any time. Check out the webinars page at verify.com for all of our past and upcoming sessions. First, we're going to go ahead and go through. Jumped ahead there. We're going to do a quick overview of what Verify can do for you. Then we'll jump into a live demo where Mike's going to walk us through resolving the aforementioned call count discrepancies. We'll pause for Q&A afterwards. During the demo, if you have any questions, make sure to ask them in chat, and we will answer them after the presentation. After the Q&A, we'll also reward one lucky attendee with a $50 Amazon gift card. So hang around to see if you've won. So a quick overview of Verify. We are the preferred analytics and management solution tool for Cisco, Zoom, and now Microsoft Teams collaboration. Deployable either on-prem or as a hosted cloud solution, we provide industry-leading call reporting and analytics, as well as customizable dashboards and widgets, UCCX reporting, remote phone control, change management, Cisco CUCM and CDR reporting, Zoom call reporting, and our most recent addition as of Verify 61, Microsoft Teams call reporting. So if you have questions on any of our features, please contact us at support@verify.com or simply reach out to your account manager for more information. And one more thing before we kick this off, for an additional fee, Verify offers an enhanced consulting service, or ECS, to our customers. Verify's SE team will engage with you on a one-on-one basis to remotely provide additional consulting, report building, dashboard configuration, and system monitoring assistance. This is a service that provides you with a dedicated Verify SE to do the heavy lifting, giving you a stress-free and hands-off experience. For more information, please contact us or your account manager, and we'd be glad to speak more in depth about pricing and terms of service for our enhanced consulting services, or ECS. All right, with that, let's kick it off into the wild. I'm going to hand it over to Mike now. Please remember to type your questions in the chat, and we'll address them at the end of the presentation. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you, everyone, for hanging out today. As Brian said, we're going to go over some different scenarios as to why your call counts in the reports, or just totals, numbers, values, why sometimes they may not always make sense, and kind of how to troubleshoot or how to identify, where maybe some of those extra calls or those discrepancies are kind of coming from. So I have a couple different scenarios here. The reports are already generated, and I'll kind of explain and show you, kind of like what goes on. So one of the I guess the issues of the discrepancies that we hear most often, and I'll start off with kind of a somewhat simple one. So here's a sample report. I ran it this morning, and I just threw on all of some different counts. So we'll see reports where users run a report. They'll run like a query on just calls for the day or calls to a hunt group or department, and then they have something like where they start including all the different call counts. And so if I go into, let me log in my lab real quick. If I go into reports, and you'll see under the search sets or under the grouping as well. If I just search for the word count, you'll see we've total call count, connected call count, not connected, abandoned off hook, answered, forwarded, voicemail, transfers to, from, blind, all these different types of counts. And so people will throw them in there to get an idea of what's going on, and you'll end up with a total call count of 2,592. And then someone, usually a manager or whomever is getting the report, will look at these numbers in their head and then add them up. They'll bring up their calculator real quick. We drag it over, and then they'll start adding up the numbers. So it's 1676 plus 916 plus 95 plus 1676 again plus 838 is 5,201. Whereas our total call count is 2,592. Well, how do you have more? And the simple answer is it's because calls can have more than one scenario type or call scenario applied to it. So easiest way to think of it is an abandoned call. So an abandoned call is where, from like the logic point of view, it's where the caller disconnects the call before the call was connected to its destination. So you call into a hunt group, call rings, no one answers, caller hangs up, that's abandoned. I call Brian, it rings, I hang up before it goes to voicemail, that's abandoned. I call Brian, call goes over to voicemail, that's not abandoned. That would be in this case a voicemail call. But so a call that is abandoned is also a call that's not connected. So these 95 calls here under the abandoned call counts are also part of the 916 not connected calls. Now, not all not connected calls are abandoned calls, but all abandoned calls are not connected. So if I scroll down here, and a really easy way to troubleshoot, and I was going to get this later in the call, but since we're here, a really easy way to kind of troubleshoot, and maybe not this much call volume, but when you're looking at like a smaller search set, is to throw on the detail and then to look at your calls. And so there is a column that highlights like what the call records kind of fall under. And under the detail section, if you just search for scenario, it's called call scenario types. And so you can add it to the report. You can also filter by these different scenario types. So that's newer to the software. If you're running one of the more current releases, when creating a search set, we've added call scenario types as a search criteria. So if you only want to report on abandoned calls, you can just select abandoned calls and see it that way. If you want to just report on connected calls, answered calls, or if you want to see all calls, instead of like in the old days, you used to use a wildcard, you can come in here and just add total calls. And this is a really easy way to bring in all of the call data for whatever search term you're looking for. But so when you're looking at the C or to identify, how are we tagging this call with the different scenario, throw in the scenario types and then just kind of scroll down so you can see, a bunch of these are not connected calls. And then when we get to abandoned call, this abandoned call here is not secure. It's also not connected. This call here, answered, connected, short duration, transferred from. So as the calls, depending if they're transferred, forwarded, did they connect, did they not connect? When you start adding a bunch of different call counts to your report, you may get calls that appear in more than one column or more than one scenario type. So an easy way, though, to kind of add up your calls, or if you want the numbers to match, if you add up the connected call count and the not connected call counts, those should, in most cases, I don't see why they wouldn't, but they should always total, or they should always equal your total call count. So, for example, plus 916 equals 2592. So in this case, these two will go answered and not answered. I mean, really, when you get into the answered or the answered calls, or like the when you get out of the connected or not connected call counts, anything outside of that, that's when you can have calls that are going to count in multiple different scenario types. So so really easy, with the numbers don't add up when you're looking at the call count, it's because one call can appear under different or multiple different scenario types. And so moving on, next example. So let me bring up another sample here. This is my basic phone report. Another kind of scenario we see where the numbers get kind of curious, if we can call it curious, when users have multiple search sets in a report. So the majority of reports we see, you're creating one search set, and then that's what the report is bringing back, or the software is bringing to the report. But for more complicated reports, you can create, or you can add, multiple search sets to bring in the different call scenarios that you want to see. So in this case, in this report here, I have 3 different search sets. They're pretty obvious, or they're pretty easy to understand. My first one, called all calls, I'm bringing back all the calls where the originating or terminating device, so both sides of the call, where the device ends with BCD, and then I have a second one here where just the originating device ends with BCD, and then the terminating device ends with BCD. So what we see here on the right-hand side, when looking at the total call counts, you can see that hopefully, we have, so again, bringing back my trusty Windows calculator, we have 794, 374 calls. I don't even need a calculator. And then 513 calls. And then my total call count is not, close to 2,000. It's 794. And clearly, the sum of these three values is not 794. So why in the search set criteria summary is this number different? So the reason why is because kind of what we're seeing in the call history report here, these three search sets have, they share some of the same call records. So within Cisco's data, every call record has a primary key identifier. And if you ever open up the data from CAR, it's somewhere in the middle of the record. You'll see it. It's a string of text or a string of characters really that looks like this. And each record has a unique value. This is how we exclude or how we prevent duplicate records or true duplicate records from entering the database. This value is always expected to be unique. So the total call count when you see it for each search set, so for these three rows, is how many calls were returned within that query. So each of these search sets is a different separate query. They're not working together. And then the grand total is the number of unique call records amongst those three searches. So really, in this example, I made it kind of dumb, but this search and this search are basically both halves of this search. So these calls, so basically the 374 calls are also part of the 794 in this case, and the 513 calls are also part of the 794 here. Now, the reason why they add up to like 887 and not 794 is because between these two searches, they're also sharing data or sharing call records as well. So think of it like, I'll get the next example. So this 794 is the number of unique key identifiers. So again, your grand total here in the search set summary is how many unique records are included in all of the search criterias. And then the count here will be, how many are brought in from each search. So if you have multiple queries and they include, the same or some of the same call records, when you add up the total call count, it will not equal the grand total here. This will give you a different value because it's kind of a different point of view. And then you'll also see in the detail section here, if you don't have grouping enabled, you'll see just 794 rows of data here as well. And then my next example is my phone reports. This is kind of the similar report. I got rid of one of the search sets or the two other search sets. I had the same 794 calls here, but I turned on grouping. So when you get to grouping, we know that there's 794 calls where the originating and terminating device ends with BCD. So I turned on grouping. I'm grouping it on the device name or either originating or terminating. I just want to see how many calls either came from or went to each of the devices in my search. And so now looking at the values, I've got 85, 145, 14, 584, 87, and 2. My grand total here is higher than my initial search. And if I go back, bring back my calculator, we'll do 85. 85 plus 145 plus 14 plus 584 plus 8 plus 7 plus 2, 845. So in the grouping, now we know that the grouping section is, so whereas the search set table, this grand total is the number of unique call records. This grand total is the sum of all of these values here. And I'll explain how the grouping works using my handy Google Doc here. So let's say in a simple scenario where we're not dealing with 700 call records, we have 4 calls. Mike calls Victor, Mike calls John, Dre calls Mike, and Mike calls Dre, and that's in our search. So in our search set, or in our search set total call count, we have 1 call, 2 calls, 3 calls, and then we have a 4th call here. Total call count is 4. Now, if we take this data and we group on it, and we're grouping it based upon the person who either placed or received a call, well, Mike was part of 1, 2, 3, 4 calls. So Mike has 4 calls. John was part of 1 call. So John has 1 call. Dre was part of 2 calls. So Dre has 2 calls. And Victor was part of 1 call. So Victor has 1 call. The grand total of how many calls there were between how many, the total call count is 4, 5, 7, and then 8. So we have 8 total calls. So that's how from 4 unique calls, we can get 8. And that's what we see that a lot with Cisco data, whether you're grouping on the end user, the device, because with every call record, there's 2 sides to the call. If there's the calling party and then the called party, or, final call party, terminating device, we call it different things based upon the value. But so in the grouping section, because you're grouping it on either the user or the phone or the number, you're going to, or you could get higher call counts when, when 2 of your values. So like if this phone here calls this phone here, then those 2 phones are going to share 1 record in your total call count up here, but they each get tagged because they were participating in that call. Now, the number also isn't always going to be just double. In this case, if we're running it on if we were to run this report on a specific department, Victor, Mike, and Dre were all part of the sales department, and John wasn't. So in the grouping section, we're only looking at the sales team. If John wasn't included in that, then John wouldn't be included in the grouping, and then our grand total now stays at 4 under the search sets, but the grouping total drops down to 7. So again, your numbers are not always going to be 4, and it's because, or the grand total won't always be the same between the search set and the grouping, and that's because it's kind of like a different point of view. Whereas your search set, I always think of your search set stats. So let me go back to that. The search set stats up here are always going to just give you information on your search. So this is what you brought into the reports, whereas your grouping is going to take the data and then, it's going to take and kind of be a little more analytical, and it's going to give you an idea of, of what's going on. So, again, different ways to point it, but, whether it's a phone or user or device, that's why you're seeing that discrepancy when you start to, to add numbers. All right, how much time? We have some time. Okay, one more report. Actually, yeah, one more report. Let me close up some of these windows here. This report is a hunker report, and we see a lot of when building reports, especially when you're getting into inbound calls, like outbound calls within Cisco's data. It's pretty straightforward. When I call a customer or a pizza place down the street, it's a simple outbound call. It's usually just 1 record. You're not seeing a bunch of transfers. I guess you can, but rarely do we ever. So when looking at outbound call traffic, it's the counts are pretty straightforward. But when you're getting into like hunt groups or like inbound calls, that's where calls can be transferred. Calls can go to a call handler, to reception, a contact center, back to a hunt group, to voicemail. And as you hit all those different hops, you could see 1 call in the real world create 5, 6, 7, 9, 10 records in the data. And so that's where when dealing on the inbound side of traffic, especially with the hunt groups, you can see numbers that just kind of don't make sense at first glance. And as always, it's always 2 things I do when troubleshooting kind of counts in the report is, 1, I always try to run the report on the smallest amount of data possible, because it's a lot easier to look at 30 calls instead of 3,000 to kind of as long as that there's a discrepancy within those 30 calls, it's a lot easier to look through. And the second thing is always kind of look at the detail. When comparing 2 reports, whether you're comparing our data against contact centers or something you're seeing on a different platform, I always like to kind of lean on the detail to see, well, hey, if there's 35 calls in this report and there's 30 calls in this report, by going through the detail, I can easily identify which 5 calls are missing. If I'm only looking at numbers, it makes it a lot harder. Well, yeah, okay, I know that there's a 5 call discrepancy, but without being able to identify what calls are missing, it makes it a lot more challenging to kind of to determine why it's happening. So this report here, I just did a quick search on a hunt group. This is our standard hunt group in our lab data 77280. It pulls back 492 calls. I'll get into this in a second. But there's some scenarios when you're running like hunt groups or calls into a call center, why the numbers don't match. So we have 492 calls. Again, grouping 492. So we know the calls aren't counting more than once. When you're getting into grouping and you're matching calls, we have certain values in the data. You'll see have a capital CUCM in the name. When it's a CUCM value, like CUCM end user ID, CUCM device description, these are values that are not coming from the CDR, but they're coming from call manager itself. So like user information, device descriptions, device pool, that information, it's not contained in the CDR, so we have to go out and match the call records to what's in call manager. In some cases, like calls that go to voicemail, calls that are abandoned, especially when they're coming into a hunt group, we can't match them. It's like when we're grouping on an end user ID, like in this case, we have different end users here. We can't, or there's some calls that we cannot match to an end user because the call didn't go to an end user. It went to voicemail. It was abandoned and it was never picked up by an end user. So in that case, we do have the option when you're looking at the grouping. Let me turn this on. So I'm grouping by like the end user. Let's go back to terminating. So if my report was set up like this, where I'm looking for the end user ID, there's a toggle here to include grouping for unassociated. So if we can't match the call to whatever we're grouping on, in this case, end user, we'll kind of throw them into a bucket here that says no associated, and then whatever we're grouping on. So these 95 calls, based on what we saw in call manager, we couldn't match them to. So if you have this turned off like this, then this row won't be in here, and these 95 calls won't appear in the grouping. So this would be, 95 less. What was it? 397, 96, 8. And so you would have, again, your counts could won't match. So again, if you see a drop in your grouping section, make sure this is turned on. If it's not, that could explain it. But just looking through the data, there's a couple different reasons why you may see inflated call count. So like you may see your total call count just kind of be higher than what you expect. Not even like comparing grouping to the search sets. Just, hey, I only have 30 calls a day, but why am I seeing 50 or 60 calls per day or in my search? So a good way to look at that and to kind of troubleshoot that is, especially with hunt groups, is to, again, turn on detail, scroll through it, and look for any oddities. You could also look for turn on Cradle to Grave and see what you have here. So one thing I always look for is transfer leg. So if a call is being transferred, especially like a cold transfer call, and this is kind of going back to the first report where we're seeing where the abandoned calls and the not connected calls, a cold transfer if someone just kind of blind transfer the call to a hunt group or to somebody else, that can create two records. One is the record that was connected, and then one would be that kind of cold transfer. So like if a call is being delivered from like UCCX to a hunt group, or is being transferred or being parked is another one, or they can all kind of create like additional call legs that could inflate your call volume, and that's why it's important to look at details. So let me see if I can find one. And the easy way to kind of find records when they're not duplicates, but like where one call has more than one record, because we don't want like if a call into a hunt group creates multiple records that are being included in the search results, you'll see it usually when like multiple or it's two records have the same like start time, or they're pretty close together, or you'll see two records with the same caller ID. Let me just kind of click on one of these here and we'll just kind of go through it. So here's a good example. Let me back out a little bit. Call came into the hunt group. So call comes in, hits Unity, and we're looking cradle to grave. The highlighted records are the ones that match my search. So I was looking for all the calls into 77280. So this one sequence here has your call goes to Unity, CCX delivers the call to the agent, caller goes to the agent, and then this is where the call here, the agent at 7457 does a cold or blind transfers the call to 77280, which then boom, this zero duration blind transfer record, it creates a record, but it's tagged against the hunt group because, because the number matches our query. And then when the caller hits the hunt group and talks to the agent for 1 minute and 10 seconds, then it creates another record. So this one call creates 2 records. One is the actual call we want to count, and then this record here is one that we really don't want to count because it's just this is the transfer. And so this is kind of, and we're seeing it even here too. If I ran a report on 7457, that's one of the extensions, I've got this record here coming, and this is contact center delivering the call to the agent, and then this is the actual call going to the agent. So if I wanted to get maybe like a more accurate call count, if I'm reporting on an extension that receives calls from CCX, I can exclude in my search, calls where the device name starts with UCCX. That way, I don't want to count this towards my agent or towards this number here. I only want to see this call here because that's the actual call. This is just, the transfer. So yeah, when looking at inbound call traffic, especially like the hunt groups or to agents or to anybody, that's receiving a large volume of inbound traffic, those transfers and whatnot, whether it's a transfer from a hunt group or a transfer from another agent or from CCX, those can create like not duplicate records, but like those transfer records can just kind of inflate your call counts. So, and there's different ways you can do it. And if you get stuck, building out the search sets, let us know. So like, give us a call or shoot us an email. So, and we can help you kind of refine your search. But in this case, if my search was 77280, this as it would bring in those duplicate records. If I wanted to exclude, maybe, hey, my hunt group only receives data from outside numbers. So I can say I want my calling party number then should always, I can do ends with, and then, if I'm only want to include, external 10-digit numbers, I can say calling party number ends with 10 X's, and that's our wild card. And then original call party equals 77280. There isn't just like one trick or like one search criteria. It depends upon your environment. You could do it on calling party number, device name. If I was doing it, building a report on the agent, I would do it based upon device name. It's just a matter of looking at the data and kind of understanding which records you want to exclude. And I don't know if I have any parked. Oh, here we go, park calls. So when a call comes to a hunt group, if it's being queued or being parked, you can see different things. Like in this case, this call is hitting 77280. It goes to the hunt group, and then the call, it says parking lot device. This is the call being queued. So we see the call being queued, rings, and then it's queued again. So these records here, again, this call, only one call, it creates multiple records. So again, look at your detail, and yes, this call is being parked. It's maybe important to know, but it's also inflating your call counts. So, exclude your parking lot device. Again, take a look at your detail when building a report, and that's and you can kind of give you an idea as to what maybe you want to exclude so that your call counts are more accurate. Because again, this one here is 5 records, comes in, parked, comes in, parked, comes in. So really, this call was presented 3 different times, looks like, or maybe no, maybe it was just reparked. Maybe it was presented 3 different times. And then we can see it right here, and so that so you can clean it up. And that brings me to, before we're almost out of time here, sequence count. So we have 2 different call counts. One is total call count. That's kind of our default call count. And we also have the total call sequence count. And so total call count for this query is 492. Sequence count is 436. Why? So the sequence count, what that means is it takes, when you get on the cradle to grave, let me scroll back down. Sorry for scrolling. When you get into the cradle to grave data, this group of records. So in our total call count, this one call counts twice. So in the number or in our default number, this call will count twice because there's 2 unique records that are included in the search. When you look at the sequence counts, it takes this entire sequence and counts it as 1. So it takes So when looking at this call here would count as 1 in the sequence counts. That call I was just looking at, where there were 4 or 5 different, if I can find it again, I'm probably not going to find it again. Maybe I will. The one with the calls parts right here. So like this call here, zoom out a little bit. This call here will count 5 times in your total call count, but this entire call as a sequence will only count once in the total call sequence count. So if you want to exclude, or the easy way to exclude call transfers and everything else from your total call count is to include, or is to select the total call sequence count instead of the total call count when building your reports. Or if you want both points of view, I throw them in there and then I kind of explain to the person what each means, and they can decide from there and move on. So really, to kind of from a troubleshooting point of view, lean on your detail. The call history, which is this section right here, when building out a report, it's also really great to kind of jump in here and build out your query so that you can kind of see the data before you commit to building a report. And then lean on detail, call history, and that sequence count to see how many unique sequences there are within your data. And even if the call only has 1 record, it still only counts once as a sequence. And so I think that kind of covered everything kind of quick. Brian, I know we're over. I'll punt it back to you.
All right. So thanks again, everybody, for joining us today. We appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule. Be sure to join us next week, where Trey and Victor are going to be giving us a sneak peek of Verify 16.2. So be sure to register for that. Thanks again. Thanks, Mike. Thanks, everyone, for attending. And we will see you next time.